Poor girl finds 3 newborn babies. See what happened alone and with nowhere to sleep. She heard a faint cry coming from behind a hospital. When she found the babies, she took them in her arms and decided she wouldn't leave any of them behind. What began as an impulsive act turned into a real story of love and rebirth. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. We continue. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear in your life. The fine December rain was wetting the streets of Chicago when Emily woke up under the awning of a closed bakery. Her 17 years seemed to carry the weight of an entire lifetime. In the last 5 years, she had known more roofs than she could count, but none of them for long enough to call home. Foster families came and went like seasons, each with their promises and their inevitable disappointments. That morning, her stomach had been growling for 2 days. Emily had learned to ignore hunger, just as she had learned to ignore harsh words, disapproving looks, and doors closing behind her. She walked the streets with no defined direction, just following the survival instinct she had developed over the years. Memorial General Hospital was a few blocks away. Emily knew that place well. 3 years ago, she had spent 2 weeks hospitalized for pneumonia, and she remembered the nurse who worked the night shift, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and careful hands who always asked how she was feeling and genuinely seemed interested in the answer. Around 11 at night, Emily found her usual refuge behind the hospital. It was a small courtyard between 2 wings of the building, sheltered from the rain and away from curious eyes. She had discovered that little corner months ago when one of her temporary families had kicked her out after discovering she had eaten a piece of cake meant for a birthday party. The truth was that Emily could no longer remember the last time she had tasted something sweet. She settled between 2 large garbage bins, using a piece of cardboard as insulation from the cold ground. The movement of the hospital decreased at that hour, but it was still possible to hear nurses coming and going through the corridors. Emily closed her eyes, trying to ignore the cold creeping up her back, when a strange sound caught her attention. It was a cry, weak, almost imperceptible, but definitely a baby's cry. Emily raised her head, straining her ears. The sound was coming from somewhere nearby, but she couldn't identify exactly where. She got up slowly, following the noise carefully to avoid making any sound. Behind a hospital waste container, she found a large cardboard box. The crying was coming from there. Emily approached with her heart racing, not knowing what to expect. When she opened the box, her breath failed. 3 small babies, wrapped in hospital blankets, were moving restlessly at the bottom of the box. They couldn't be more than a few weeks old. They were so small, so fragile, that Emily felt a tightness in her chest that she had never experienced before. One of them was crying softly, while the other 2 seemed to be sleeping, but their little faces were red from the cold. Emily looked around, searching for someone. Maybe the parents had stepped away for a moment. Maybe it was some mistake. But the courtyard was empty, and from the position of the box it seemed obvious that someone had left the children there intentionally. A mixture of anger and sadness overcame her. How could someone abandon babies like that? Without thinking twice, Emily took off her jacket and spread it over the children. They were so small that they easily fit in her lap. The baby who was crying calmed down immediately when she picked him up, and Emily felt something unknown stir inside her chest. It was as if a part of her that had been dormant for years had awakened. "I won't leave you here," she murmured softly, her voice breaking. She didn't know where these words came from, nor why she was so certain of what she was saying. She just knew that, for the first time in her life, she had something worth fighting for. Emily improvised a backpack with her shirt, carefully placing all 3 babies inside. They were surprisingly light, and she could carry them without difficulty. She left through the back of the hospital, avoiding the busy areas. She didn't have a plan, just a primitive instinct to protect those little lives. She walked for more than an hour until she found an abandoned shelter on the outskirts of the city. It was an old warehouse that had been used by an NGO but was now empty. Emily knew the place because she had spent a few nights there the previous winter. It had a roof, protection from the wind, and most importantly, privacy. In the days that followed, Emily discovered a side of herself that she completely unknown. With infinite patience, she cared for the 3 babies. When she had no money to buy milk, she asked for help at people's doors, and her youth combined with the image of babies in her arms usually moved people. When she got some change, she bought diapers and bottles at the cheapest market she could find. At night, when the babies cried, Emily invented lullabies. Her voice wasn't professional, but it had something genuine that immediately calmed the children. She talked to them all the time, telling stories she made up on the spot, describing a future where they would all be safe and happy. "You'll go to a nice school," she told them, as she changed their diapers. "You'll have toys, you'll learn to read, and when you grow up, you can choose anything you want to be." Emily didn't know where these words came from, but they flowed naturally, as if she were making a sacred promise. For 2 weeks, Emily lived the most intense experience of her life. For the first time, she felt needed, important, loved. The babies depended on her completely, and that gave her a purpose she had never experienced before. She woke up in the middle of the night to feed them, spent the day looking for ways to get money and resources, and at night sang to them until they fell asleep. But reality began to assert itself. Money was running out, the cold was getting more intense, and Emily realized that the babies needed proper medical care. One of them had developed a worrying cough, and she didn't know what to do. It was on a Friday morning that Emily made a difficult decision. She wrapped the 3 babies in their cleanest blankets, packed up what little they had, and walked toward the hospital. She wasn't going to give them back, but she knew she needed help. When she reached the gates of Memorial General Hospital, Emily hesitated. What if someone asked questions she couldn't answer? What if they tried to separate her from the babies? Fear almost made her give up, but the baby with the cough moaned softly in her arms, and she knew she had no choice. It was then that she saw a familiar figure leaving the hospital. It was the nurse who had taken care of her years ago. Sarah, Emily remembered. Nurse Sarah. The woman walked toward the bus stop, but when she saw Emily standing on the sidewalk with the babies in her arms, she immediately stopped. Her eyes widened in surprise, and for a moment, Emily thought she was going to call security, but Sarah just approached slowly, with that gentle expression Emily remembered so well. "Emily, Emily, is that really you?" asked the nurse, her voice filled with emotion. "My God, dear, what's happening here?" Emily opened her mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come out. How to explain everything that had happened? How to tell that she had found 3 abandoned babies, and that in the last 15 days, she had discovered what it meant to love someone unconditionally? How to explain that for the first time in her life, she felt complete? Sarah looked at the babies in Emily's arms, then at the young woman's thin and tired face, and something in her expression changed. It was as if she could see the whole story in Emily's eyes, all the pain and all the hope mixed there. "Come with me," Sarah said simply, extending her hand. "Let's go home." Emily hesitated for a moment. She had learned not to trust promises, not to believe in gestures of kindness, but something in Sarah's voice was different. It wasn't pity or obligation. It was recognition, as if she saw in Emily not a troubled child, but a brave mother who had done the impossible to protect her children. Sarah's house was in a simple neighborhood on the east side of Chicago. It was a modest building, 2 blocks from the hospital where she had worked for 15 years. When she opened the door, Emily smelled something she had long forgotten. The smell of a real home. It wasn't just the aroma of home-cooked food, but something more subtle. The scent of well-cared-for furniture, clean clothes drying on the line, fresh flowers on the living room table. "Sit here in the living room," said Sarah, indicating a sofa covered with a colorful crochet blanket. "I'll prepare bottles for them and something warm for you to eat." Emily obeyed in silence, still holding the 3 babies against her chest. Her eyes scanned the room, registering every detail. The photographs on the shelf, the floral fabric curtains, the small television on a dark wooden cabinet. In one of the photographs, Emily saw a younger Sarah next to a boy of about 10 years old. Both smiled at the camera, and there was something in the nurse's expression that Emily had never seen before. A pure, carefree joy. The boy had the same kind eyes as Sarah and a mischievous smile that caught the attention. "That's Michael," said Sarah, returning from the kitchen with a tray. She had followed Emily's gaze. "My son. He passed away 5 years ago, a traffic accident on his way home from school." Sarah's voice trembled slightly, but she maintained control. "That's why I recognized you that day at the hospital. You were the same age he would be now." Emily didn't know what to say. She had never dealt well with other people's pain, mainly because she had learned to hide her own. But something in the way Sarah talked about her son, with love instead of bitterness, touched deep in her heart. "He would love to meet these little ones," continued Sarah, approaching with a warm bottle. Michael always wanted younger siblings. She extended her arms and Emily, after a moment of hesitation, handed over one of the babies. She watched fascinated as Sarah held the child naturally, testing the temperature of the milk on her own wrist before offering the bottle. In the weeks that followed, Emily experienced something she had never known: stability. Sarah didn't ask invasive questions about Emily's past or about how she had found the babies. She seemed to instinctively understand that some stories need to be told at the right time, when trust is built through daily gestures, not interrogations. The routine that was established in the house was simple but comforting. Emily woke up early to help with the babies, who had become smarter and more responsive each day. Sarah worked at the hospital during the day, but always came back with some surprise: new clothes for the children, colorful toys, or special ingredients for dinner. "You have a knack for this," Sarah would say, watching Emily bathe one of the babies. "It's natural in you, not just anyone has this patience, this intuition." Emily felt her chest warm with the compliments. For the first time in her life, someone valued her skills, recognized her effort. The babies thrived under the care of the two women. The boy, who had developed a cough, recovered completely after a few days of proper care. The two girls, whom Emily had mentally named Emma and Lily, gained weight and began to smile when they saw their familiar faces. It was Emily who suggested the official names. "Can I call them Jacob, Emma and Lily?" she asked one night while rocking Jacob to sleep. "I know I'm not their real mother, but—" Sarah gently interrupted. "You are their mother, Emily. Maybe you didn't give birth, but it was you who chose them, who saved them, who spent sleepless nights caring for them. That's more than many biological mothers do." The trust between the two women grew day by day. Sarah began to tell stories about Michael, about what it was like to be a mother, about her fears and joys. Emily, in turn, began to share fragments of her past: the succession of temporary homes, the constant feeling of not belonging anywhere, the loneliness she carried like a second skin. "You know when I first understood that Michael was really my son?" Sarah asked one Sunday afternoon, as they watched the babies play on the living room rug. "It wasn't when he was born, or when I brought him home from the hospital. It was on a night when he had a high fever, crying non-stop. I was exhausted, desperate, not knowing what to do, and suddenly I realized that I would do anything, absolutely anything, for him to be well, that I would give my life for his without thinking twice. It was at that moment that I understood what it meant to be a mother." Emily looked at Jacob, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms, and knew exactly what Sarah was talking about. She had felt that way about all three of them for weeks, but the tranquility began to be threatened when a social worker appeared at Sarah's door on a Thursday morning. The man, a middle-aged gentleman with a serious expression, introduced himself as Charles Morgan and said he was investigating an anonymous complaint about undocumented children living in the house. "Ms. Sarah, can you explain the situation of these children to me?" he asked, taking notes in a small notebook. "There is no record of them in the system, and this raises some important legal questions." Emily felt her blood freeze. She was in the kitchen preparing bottles when she heard the conversation and instinctively pulled the three babies closer to herself. Sarah remained calm, explaining that she had found Emily in a vulnerable situation and that they were arranging the necessary documentation. "I'll need to make some follow-up visits," said the social worker before leaving, "and I'll also need to talk to the young woman separately." His eyes fixed on Emily with an expression she knew well. It was the look of someone who had already decided that she was a problem to be solved. That night, Emily could barely sleep. The fear of being separated from the babies tormented her. She had learned to love deeply, and now she knew that this also meant having much more to lose. It was Sarah who suggested they seek legal help. "I know a lawyer who works with adoption cases," she said. "Let's regularize this situation properly. You want to raise these children, and I want to help you do that." Emily looked at Sarah with tears in her eyes. "Why are you doing this? Why are you helping me?" Sarah smiled, that maternal smile that Emily had learned to love. "Because when I lost Michael, I thought I would never have the chance to care for children again, to be useful in that way. You have given me back a purpose that I thought I had lost forever." But the situation became even more complicated when a woman began appearing at the hospital asking questions about three missing babies. She introduced herself as a volunteer social worker, but her questions were too specific, too directed. Sarah became suspicious and began investigating on her own. The woman's name was Victoria Miller, and she had worked at the hospital years ago. Sarah vaguely remembered her, an administrative employee who had been fired for inappropriate behavior. But why would she be interested in the babies? And how did she know details about them that hadn't been disclosed? When Sarah confronted Victoria at the hospital, the truth began to emerge. "Those babies were supposed to have gone to a specific family," Victoria said angrily. "There was an agreement, an arrangement. That girl ruined everything by taking them away." Sarah felt a chill in her stomach. "What kind of arrangement?" Victoria realized she had said too much and quickly moved away, but her words kept echoing in Sarah's mind. Was there something more behind the abandonment of the babies, some more complex situation than she had imagined? Victoria's words wouldn't leave Sarah's head. For 3 straight nights she barely slept, trying to understand what that woman had insinuated. What kind of arrangement could exist involving 3 newborn babies? And why had Emily reached them at exactly the right time? It was on a Saturday morning that Sarah decided to look for answers. She left Emily taking care of the babies and went to the hospital, determined to discover the truth. She talked to older colleagues, reviewed archived records, and gradually began to piece together a disturbing puzzle. The babies had been born in the hospital 3 days before Emily found them. The mother was a young woman of only 16, with no known family, who had been admitted in labor in the early hours of a rainy morning. The delivery had been complicated. They were premature triplets, but all had survived. The young mother had remained hospitalized for only 2 nights after delivery. On the 3rd day, when the babies were discharged from the neonatal ICU, she simply disappeared. The nurses reported that she seemed to be in shock, constantly repeating that she had no way to care for the children, that she had nowhere to go. "She seemed terrified," said Mrs. Rodriguez, a nursing assistant who had worked at the hospital for 30 years. "She kept looking at the babies as if she couldn't believe they were hers. She said someone would take better care of them than she could, that it was better that way." Sarah felt her heart tighten. She knew that expression of despair well. She had seen it in many young mothers over the years, but there was something more to the story that bothered her. "Mrs. Rodriguez, do you remember if anyone talked to her about the babies? Any social worker, any outsider?" The assistant thought for a moment before answering. "Now that you mention it, yes. There was a woman who showed up here a few days before the delivery. Said she worked with adoption, that she knew families interested in babies. She talked to the girl several times." Sarah's stomach turned. "This woman, she wasn't a brunette, short hair, around 40? Mrs. Rodriguez nodded, and Sarah immediately knew she was talking about Victoria. When she returned home, Sarah found a scene that warmed her heart despite her concerns. Emily was sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by the 3 babies. She had improvised a small puppet theater using colorful socks and was telling a story that made them laugh. Jacob was trying to reach the puppets with his chubby little hands, while Emma and Lily awkwardly clapped their hands. And then the bunny said to the fox, "It doesn't matter where you came from. What matters is where you're going," narrated Emily with different voices for each character. "And do you know where we're all going together? To a place full of love, where no one will ever be alone again." Sarah observed the scene for a few minutes before approaching. Emily had a natural gift with children, infinite patience and creativity that transformed simple moments into precious memories. How could someone so young who had been through so many difficulties give so much love? "Emily," said Sarah, sitting down next to her on the floor, "I need to tell you some things I discovered about the babies." Emily immediately stopped playing, her face becoming serious. "Did you find out who the real parents are?" "The biological mother," Sarah gently corrected. "She was a girl even younger than you. From what I could gather, she was in a very difficult situation and felt pressured to give up the children." Sarah told everything she had discovered about Victoria and her questionable methods. Emily listened in silence, processing each word. "So they were abandoned on purpose, so that this Victoria could hand them over to someone?" Sarah nodded. "It seems so. She probably arranged these irregular adoptions and made money from it. But why in the hospital courtyard? Why not directly to the family?" Emily was asking the right questions, and Sarah realized how much the young woman had matured in recent weeks. "I imagine the biological mother had last-minute doubts. Maybe she couldn't hand the babies over directly, and thought that leaving them at the hospital would be a way to ensure they were found and cared for." Sarah took Emily's hand. "What she didn't expect was that a brave young woman like you would appear at exactly the right time." In the days that followed, the situation became even more complicated. Social worker Charles returned to the house with more questions, and this time he brought a psychologist colleague to evaluate Emily. The woman, a grey-haired lady with a severe expression, asked a series of invasive questions about Emily's past, her emotional stability, and her ability to care for 3 children. "You're only 17, said the psychologist. "So you have no fixed income. You haven't finished school. You have no family support. How do you plan to support 3 children?" Emily felt anger rise in her throat, but Sarah reassured her with a look. "She has my support," Sarah said firmly, "and she has shown herself to be more responsible and dedicated than many adults I know. These children are healthy, happy, and loved. Isn't that what matters most?" The psychologist wrote everything down without showing emotion. "We'll need to evaluate other alternatives. There are families registered in the system for years waiting for an opportunity to adopt. Structured families, with adequate financial conditions." That night, Emily couldn't sleep. The idea of being separated from the babies terrified her. She got up in the middle of the night and went to the room where they slept. She watched Jacob, Emma, and Lily sleeping peacefully in their makeshift cribs, and felt a physical pain in her chest, just imagining not seeing them grow up. That's when she heard footsteps in the living room. Sarah had gotten up and was in the kitchen preparing tea. "Can't sleep either?" she asked when she saw Emily appear. "Sarah, what if they take the children away from me? What if they decide I'm not good enough?" Emily's voice trembled. Sarah approached and hugged her tightly. "It won't happen. I won't allow it." There was a determination in Sarah's voice that Emily had never heard before. "We'll fight for you. We'll find a way." It was then that Sarah told about an idea she had. "Remember I told you I knew a lawyer specializing in adoption? I talked to her today. She said there's a way for you to become the legal mother of the children, but it will take courage." Emily straightened in her chair. "What kind of courage?" "First, we'll need to find the biological mother, convince her to sign the papers renouncing legal custody. Then we'll need to prove that Victoria was acting irregularly. And also," Sarah hesitated before continuing, "we'll also need to find a way to give you financial and emotional stability." "What do you mean?" Emily asked, although deep down she already knew the answer. "I would like to adopt you, Emily. Officially, you would become my legal daughter, have my last name, my support, and that way you would have a much better chance of getting custody of the babies." Sarah spoke quickly, as if she were afraid of changing her mind. "I know it sounds crazy, and I don't expect an answer now, but think about it. The 2 of us together have much more strength than apart." Emily was speechless. All her life, she had dreamed of a real family, of someone who would choose her not out of obligation, but out of love. And now Sarah was offering exactly that. Not just a roof and food, but a real place in the world. "Why would you do this for me?" asked Emily, tears running down her face. Sarah smiled, that smile full of love that Emily had learned to recognize. "Because you gave me back the joy of being a mother. Because when I look at you taking care of these children, I see what Michael would have become if he had had the chance to grow up. And because I believe that some families aren't born from blood, but from choice." Emily hugged Sarah tightly, feeling for the first time in her life that she really belonged somewhere. But her happiness was interrupted by an even more surprising discovery that would change everything once again. The discovery came unexpectedly on a Tuesday morning. Emily was organizing the documents they would need to present to the judge when she found an old folder of Sarah's that had gotten mixed up with the adoption papers. Inside were photographs, certificates, and personal letters that she clearly shouldn't be seeing. She was about to close it immediately when a familiar name caught her attention. Emily Wilson Smith. It was her birth certificate, along with social worker reports and a photo of her at 5 years old. Emily was paralyzed. Why did Sarah have her old documents? How had she obtained them? When Sarah arrived from the hospital that afternoon, she found Emily sitting in the living room with the open folder in her lap and the babies playing on the rug at her feet. The expression on the young woman's face was a mixture of confusion, hurt, and hope. "You knew my story from the beginning," said Emily, her voice barely above a whisper. "You knew who I was even before you found me with the babies." Sarah sat down slowly in the armchair across from the sofa. Her eyes were full of tears, but there was also a visible relief, as if a huge weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "Not exactly as you think," Sarah began. 8 years ago, when I was working the night shift, A woman was admitted to the hospital in labor. She was alone, scared, and very young. During delivery, she kept repeating a name. Emily. She said she already had a small daughter and didn't know how she was going to care for another baby. Emily held her breath, sensing where that story would lead. The baby was born premature and had to stay in the ICU for 3 weeks. During that time, I took care of him every night. He was a beautiful boy, with large, expressive eyes. Sarah's voice trembled. The mother showed up now and then, but she was clearly in crisis. She said she had no way to raise 2 children, that she could barely take care of the girl she already had. And what happened to the baby? Emily already knew the answer, but needed to hear it. One day, she simply didn't show up anymore. The baby stayed in the hospital for 2 more weeks, until social services found a temporary family for him. But before that, Sarah got up and went to a drawer in the bookcase, removing a yellowed envelope. She left me this. Inside the envelope was a handwritten letter in shaky handwriting. To the nurse who cared for my boy. Thank you for everything. I couldn't be a mother to him, but I know someone will. If you ever can, please look after my Emily too. She's with a family in Oak Park, but I know it won't work out. She deserves someone who truly loves her. Rebecca Wilson. Emily read the letter 3 times before she could process what she was reading. My mother. She asked you to take care of me. Yes, and since then I've tried to find you. It took years because you changed families constantly, but I never gave up. When I finally managed to locate you, you were already 16 and had run away from the last temporary home. I lost track of you again. Sarah moved closer and sat next to Emily. When I saw you that night at the hospital with the babies in your arms, I thought it was a coincidence. But then when you said your name, I understood that there is no such thing as coincidence. There is destiny. And my brother? The baby who was born after me? Emily asked, although a part of her already knew the answer. Sarah smiled through tears. Michael, your younger brother was my Michael. The world stopped for Emily. For long minutes she sat in silence, processing the magnitude of that revelation. Michael, the smiling boy in the photographs, was her brother. The son Sarah had lost was her blood family. And now she was caring for the nieces and nephew he would never know. That's why you helped me, Emily finally said. It wasn't generosity, it was obligation. No, Sarah responded firmly, taking Emily's hands. It began as a promise I made to your mother, that's true. But it transformed into much more. When I saw you caring for these babies, when I saw your courage, your determination, your unconditional love, I understood that you're not just Michael's sister. You're the daughter I always wanted to have. At that moment, Jacob began to cry, and Emily automatically got up to pick him up. The baby calmed down immediately upon recognizing her touch, and Emily felt once again that deep connection she had experienced since the first day. The children need you, said Sarah, observing the scene. Regardless of our past, regardless of blood ties, they chose you as their mother. And I chose you as my daughter, not out of obligation, but out of love. In the weeks that followed, the truth about the origin of the babies finally came to light. With the help of Sarah's lawyer, they managed to locate Rebecca Wilson, the biological mother of the children, who was living in a shelter on the outskirts of the city. When Emily met her, she immediately recognized her own eyes in the tired face of the woman. Rebecca was only 32, but seemed to carry the weight of much more. When she learned that her eldest daughter had found and cared for the triplets, she broke down in tears. I couldn't do it, said Rebecca, holding Emily's hands. When they were born, I looked at them and saw you as a little girl, remembered how I couldn't take proper care of you. I was afraid of ruining their lives too. You didn't ruin my life, Emily replied, surprising herself with the absence of anger in her voice. Everything I went through brought me to them, brought me to Sarah. Sometimes things happen the way they should happen. Rebecca agreed to sign the custody waiver papers, but with one condition. She wanted to be a grandmother to her grandchildren, even from a distance. She wanted to receive photos, letters, and perhaps, when she was more stable, be able to visit them occasionally. The investigation into Victoria revealed a larger scheme of irregular adoptions that resulted in her arrest and the review of several cases. Social worker Charles, upon learning of the entire family history, completely changed his stance and began to support Emily's adoption by Sarah. The legal process took 4 months to complete. During this time, Emily finished high school through a GED program, with Sarah helping her with her studies every night after the babies were asleep. She also started a nursing technical course inspired by the example of her adoptive mother. On the day of the final hearing, Emily was nervous. She wore a blue dress that Sarah had bought especially for the occasion and carried Jacob in her arms, while Emma and Lily played on the floor of the courthouse waiting room. The judge, a middle-aged man with a kind expression, read all the documents carefully before speaking. Emily Wilson Smith, it's rare to see a case like yours. A young woman who at 17 demonstrated more maturity and maternal responsibility than many adults. Sarah Wilson, your dedication not only to Emily but to this family that you built together is admirable. He paused for a moment, looking at the babies who were playing happily on the floor. From all the reports I have here, it's clear that these children are in a loving, stable and healthy environment. Therefore, I grant the full adoption of Emily Wilson Smith by Sarah Wilson and the permanent custody of the minors, Jacob, Emma and Lily Wilson, to Emily Wilson. Emily broke down in tears of joy. Sarah hugged her tightly, and the babies, as if understanding the importance of the moment, stopped playing and looked at them with their curious little eyes. 6 months later, Emily was celebrating her 18th birthday at a small but love-filled party. They were in the new house they had bought together, a simple 2-story home in a safe neighborhood, with a yard where the babies could play. Jacob was taking his first wobbly steps. Emma had learned to say "mommy," and Lily was the smartest of the three, always observing everything attentively. Rebecca showed up at the party, bringing simple but thoughtfully made presents for her grandchildren. She was working as a janitor at a school and had managed to get a small apartment. It wasn't much, but it was a new beginning. "Thank you," she said to Emily as they watched the children play in the yard, "for doing what I couldn't do." "Thank you for giving me the chance," replied Emily, "and for giving me them." That night, after everyone had left and the babies were sleeping, Emily and Sarah sat on the porch of the new house. The sky was starry, and for the first time in a long time, Emily felt completely at peace. "Remember when you found me that night?" asked Emily. "I thought I was saving the babies, but actually they saved me." Sarah smiled. "It wasn't just them. You saved me too. You gave me back the joy of being a mother, of having a family." Emily looked at the illuminated house behind them, where 3 babies slept peacefully, knowing they would wake up the next day with people who loved them unconditionally. She thought about the journey they had traveled together, the difficulties overcome, the love that had grown between all of them. "You know what I learned," said Emily. "Family isn't about where you came from, it's about who chooses to stay." Sarah nodded, taking her daughter's hand. "And we choose to stay, forever." 2 years later, Emily graduated as a nursing technician and began working at the same hospital where it had all begun. Jacob, Emma and Lily grew up healthy and happy, surrounded by much love. Rebecca became a constant presence in their lives, a loving grandmother who had learned that it's never too late to start over. And Emily finally understood that her story hadn't begun on that rainy night when she found the babies. It had begun much earlier, with a young mother who made a promise to a kind nurse, with a brother she never knew but who connected her to her destiny, and with the certainty that true love always finds a way to lead us home. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope that the story of Emily, Sarah, and the little ones Jacob, Emma, and Lily has deeply touched your hearts. This narrative reminds us that sometimes the most unexpected encounters lead us to the greatest loves of our lives, and that a true family is built with daily choices of care and dedication. If this story moved you as much as it moved us to tell it, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave a like on this video. Share in the comments your own experiences about family, love, and second chances. Every day we bring unique stories that explore the complexity and beauty of human life. For more narratives that will touch your soul, click on the special playlist we've prepared for you. Until the next story, and remember, love always finds a way to lead us home.